360Talking. I'm here with the one, the only, fantastic Ann Pirvu.
You know.
Thank you so much for coming in.
What a pleasure.
Yeah.
What a fun, wonderful, unique, innovative concept. It's so cool. And it's also 360, which is very cutting edge. I actually did a project recently with the Science Center where we organized a VR experience as part of this MindWorks exhibit. And essentially you get to sit at a table. There's a 5-minute scene that a bunch of actors and I sort of perform. And there's, a mystery. There's something happens and you have to, as the viewer, it's a very immersive experience. So basically, long story short, you get to sit at 6 different, locations around the table and experience this whole scene over and over and over from whatever seat you're sitting in, and then guess who the culprit is at the end. And it's part of a MindWorks exhibit that actually is at the Ontario Science Center until April, like the end of April, I think, or May or something like that. So fascinating, long, lengthy process, very cool, and a lot of fun. So I feel like I'm on a VR kick right now, Isaac. I'm so happy that I'm doing this with you.
It's happening. VR's becoming a thing.
It's really cool.
So I shot. Let me sort of backpedal here. I like to tell the story of how I met the person I'm talking to.
Yeah.
So I was trying to remember how we met. I'm pretty sure it's not 100% clear. It was. I think it was at that was after. So we went to a movie premiere. I think it was Hard Blazer, or it might have been Warren Sonoda.
Is that the movie? Is it
I think so.
Was that the first time? This is so funny.
We ended up sitting beside each other at the after party, sort of pub across the road from the theater, and got chatting. And you were like, "I think I've met you before." And I'm like, "I don't think so. I think this is the first time I met you." But we sort of had a long conversation because it was like there's something familiar. It's like I know you from somewhere, but we just couldn't quite place it.
I was like, "Yeah, that sounds like me."
So that's, I'm pretty sure that's, and then we did a few things to follow up. My first VR thing was with you.
Short.
A little short Graffiti Alley.
That's right.
I randomly messaged you or called you up or something. I said, "Hey, it's a beautiful day. We have a 360 camera. What are you up to?" And you just
want to come out of a wall?
Do you want to come? Do you want to come hang out and become graffiti? And you were like 100%. So that was a fun. If you look in that short film, I'll maybe post a little clip in the video here. You can see me and the other guy I was creating with, sort of like peeking around the corner. Because when you're shooting 360, you put the camera there and you just
you run. Literally, the entire production team was like, "Go, go, go!"
And you're like, "How was that? Was that good?" We're like, we can't see."
Doing my thing, What's cool about it, it's almost like a mini play, right? Because you're kind of choreographing all of your movements, and then literally the camera becomes your co-creator, because everyone else just runs, because otherwise you see them, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's such a cool, it was such a fun experience for me, like such a unique experience, and also seeing it all come together was really interesting.
Yeah, it was cool.
And a lot of fun, yeah. And now I'm just wondering for you, like, how can people... Obviously, our technology, being able to see a 360 film, right? Like, is that easier now than when did we do that? 2-3 years ago? Like, maybe longer, right? Maybe 4. We are so cutting edge.
Yeah.
No, seriously. It really was so much fun.
It was before there was commercially available headsets on the market.
That's right.
That's
why I'm asking, because I remember I could only see it on like a version of, I think you just sent me a link, and I was only able to see it because I had something, I don't know.
Yeah. There's some pictures.
Is that just technologically challenged over here?
We did that panel at Canadian Film Fest.
That's right. That's right.
And I think that might have been the first time you saw it, because I brought a headset there, and so you remember seeing pictures. There's pictures somewhere of you watching yourself in VR.
So cool. It is wild. It is just so much fun. Just so different and such an immersive,
Yeah, when it's done well, it's amazing. When it's not done well, it's
Right.
not as
Cumbersome.
amazing.
Cumbersome. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm assuming frustrating too, because like you can't. Yeah. The question I guess I have. I have a good review. How can you see it? Like, where can you see?
So YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook, all does
It's
360
all
streaming
involved
now.
in terms of how you. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can just on your phone, sort of like it'll pan when you move your camera.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the easiest way to consume it. It's not virtual reality at that time. It's 360 video where you're sort of looking around with your phone. But then switch headsets like this, where you can just basically like pop your phone in there and then boom.
That is so cool.
So it's becoming more and more. The resolutions get better, the frame rates get better. Like all the technical stuff is sort of catching up to a state where it's easy to consume.
That's amazing.
So
so we just have to make sure that people can see our short, you know?
Yeah, and yeah, that's right.
That was such a fun experience. It
Yeah.
really was. And it's actually really cool because I am graffiti and I do pop out of a wall. And, you know, for some reason, that's just my childlike wonder just like kicks in. I'm like, yay, I love it.
Remember there's that random guy that walks through, because we're
Oh,
in
yeah.
Graffiti Alley, and he's just kind of like, are you okay kind of thing? Because we were hiding, so all
Yeah,
he
yeah.
sees is this weird camera in the middle of an alley, and you sort of like stumbling around, confused.
Yeah, and he's just like, and I didn't want to break and ruin it. But like,
I think that was the take that we actually used for the final version.
It
I think
was
he leans in,
cool.
he's like, are you okay or something? So let's talk about some of your acting then. So you've been at it for a bit, some amazing roles.
I've been very lucky.
To date, what's your favorite series that you worked on? Because you've been in, well, you just mentioned video games. You've done some video games and stuff. So let's start with the TV stuff. Film, TV.
I feel like I've been pretty lucky so far. You know, like every year, like you get to do one thing that sort of like makes you really excited about what's coming up. You know, what was really awesome about last year was getting a chance to do a lot of comedy. So I grew up in Romania. You know, I came to Canada when I was 12, and I learned English from cartoons, from speaking. You know, Cartoon Network really was my life, and Looney Tunes and all that stuff. So comedy's in my blood, you know, but there's not actually that much good comedy that's happening here, you know, in Toronto specifically.
Zing, get on it, people.
There's a lot of great, I mean, yeah, Schitt's Creek, and like, you know, it's really picked up in the last couple of years. But I was lucky to do Working Moms. I have a small, really fun arc coming up actually, and for the new season 4 of Working Moms. And just being able to work and play and like, you know, be so collaborative with the scripts. Because normally, to answer your question, one of my favorite projects that I've ever done was be a part of the CW series Rayment. And it's a historical series, you know, about the story of Mary Queen of Scots. And my character was not at all historically accurate or historically in existence. It was, you know, just really fun. But essentially, I get passed around between a Lord Chancellor, a king, and a prince that wants to be king. And it's a, you know, a bit of a power play to sort of like make my way up the ladder and almost become the Queen of France. But it was such an amazing experience. And in that scenario, you know, when you're working in a network series, things are very straight and narrow. Like, you got to follow what is on the page, and there's a, you know, chain of command, so to speak, and the showrunner's on set sometimes, and you know, you have a lot of people to answer to, so your creativity is sort of tied into your interpretation of the character that you were hired to do, right? And what I was very fortunate in that experience was that it evolved throughout the season with me, so it was really cool. I was hired to do 3 episodes, and then until the series ended, I ended up doing 9, which was a lot of fun. But in terms of leeway, I didn't have much. In the last year, doing a lot of comedy, you know, I mean, working with Rayment and the way that she likes to work, and there was a bit of improv, and there was a lot of like just in the moment stuff. Like, comedy is very much about timing and being present, right? And so it's just a different exercise, I think, on the brain. It was awesome. And then I ended up doing a feature just in October, which is going to come out later this year, called Learning to Love Again. And it's a romantic comedy. It's my first romantic comedy, and I love romantic comedies, period. I've been saying it for years that I would love to do that. So I'm super pumped about that project coming out. You know, but it's one of those things where over the years, again, I got to do a lot of unique different things, but as you get older And as you sort of establish yourself a little bit within the industry, you sort of go from, I want to do a lot of things and I think I can do this, to I really want to do that.
Right. Well, and you get to be selective. You know, at a certain point in your career too, when you have a certain amount of success, you don't have to take everything that comes to the door, right? You can be like, oh.
And you know that not everything is for you, you know? Like I'm also teaching a lot of young, lovely students at the moment. And it's so nice to be able to say from a place of experience, you know, that as you enter this wonderful world of show business, the impression that you get and you're sort of overwhelmed with right off the bat is that you should be able to do anything. What do you mean? Of course you can do anything. What do you want her to do, right? It's like, well, no, actually, it's not about doing anything. It's about first of all, what gets you excited, right? Getting up in the morning and what you're passionate about and what you're actually fit for.
Sure.
Nobody tells you that when you first start, right? It's like, you're automatically not considered for certain things because acting is the art form of life, you know? And so the essence of who you are is very unique to each individual and each actor. And I think that part of the journey as an artist, period, but as an actor specifically, because your personality is your calling card, right? Is finding out actually what you are fit for. Like what is, you know, within your wheelhouse and what you actually can bring something to, as opposed to just like, you know, speaking those lines and pretending like you can be professional doing it. Or, do you know what I mean? There are certain things that you just have to do because they're required of you at first, and then you try your hand at it and figure out, you know, like horror, drama, like all these genres, right? And I'm not saying don't explore and don't get out there, but like you discover over time, you know, like where your heart is, in a sense, and what actually you might be really good at and have a voice in, you know.
When did you start acting? Were you young?
I actually started in Romania when I was 3, I think. We used to do. My mom used to put me in talent shows.
Okay.
It's the equivalent of pageants, you know, but they were called talent shows in Romania, and it was like nationally televised. You'd have to do like a dancing category and like a poetry recital category, and you know, what else was it? Singing. Like there would be like 3 different competitions, and I just remember growing up on stage, you know. My mom actually wanted to be an actress when she was younger. And then she became an engineer, like every good Romanian girl, you know.
It's a logical step there somewhere, maybe?
Absolutely. Well, you know, I mean, when you understand a bit about the culture, it's very, like, everyone kind of just goes to university and becomes either a doctor or a lawyer. Very, very intelligent. We value intelligence above most things. So it's very rare to meet someone, you know, in Romania that's not actually got some kind of degree, university degree or otherwise. And
good quality to have as a society.
I think
to
so.
value intelligence and achievement like that.
Of course. It also places a bit of pressure on you, and it sometimes makes you feel like this is sort of the path, right? But I feel like, you know, like any kind of country from the Eastern Bloc, at the time, like I was born, you know, in the 80s, and there was that transitional phase with the revolutions and, you know, the downfall of communism.
Was it still communist when you were?
Yeah, when I was born, yeah. But not so much after. But I mean, the tentacles are still there. So it's all very much ingrained in a sense, in the mentality and the, you know, the history of it. I'm fascinated by history, by the way. History is my favorite subject in school. I don't know what your favorite subject is.
Have you read Sapiens?
I got it for Christmas. I have not read it, but I cannot wait. I asked Santa. Santa delivered.
So that's my Harari. That's my favorite trilogy that I read last year. Was like his Homo Deus and then 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. It's sort of like a 1, 2, 3 thing. It's
you hit
fantastic.
The mother book. Yeah. So it was good.
Amazing.
You liked it. Apparently Obama was like raving about the Sapiens book specifically.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It had, for me, a handful of like, oh shit moments where you're just like, I never thought of, I sort of knew that, but I didn't think of it that way before. And there's sort of like these revelations, and the way he puts things in context and sort of like the timeline of how things unraveled throughout the sort of the evolution of humanity. And it's just it's really, for me, it was a profound sort of like eye opener. And again, some things were like I knew that, but I didn't really The way he
put it together
puts
in
it
that
together,
sequence.
the way he articulates it is fantastic. Yeah.
Fascinating. I honestly can't wait.
Yeah.
It's so cool that you said that because that was actually one of the ones that I'm looking forward to diving in. But for some reason, this year literally just kicked off. It was like, just get in there, start working, which is great.
Yeah.
It's kind of what you want. New decade, new energy.
Yeah, 2020, clear vision.
Exactly. Very cool. Also, like, I love even numbers, and I think that it's time for things to sort of settle.
You're a
and
little
progress.
OCD, that you think that.
I'm not OCD, but I really I place a lot of meaning on certain numbers. For example, oddly enough, they're odd numbers, not even numbers. But this is an even year, which just to me kind of symbolizes like a good flow of energy, a settled flow of energy moving into a brand new decade. So and new beginnings. Like I feel like I focused a lot on new beginnings. The last 2 years, I think I would say, just working towards growth and not getting stuck in anywhere, really. Just not getting stuck. Just continuing to grow and push yourself and, explore the unexplored. Because that's kind of what we're sort of afraid of in many ways. I was listening to this amazing, there's a wellness and spiritual teacher called Michael Bernard Beckwith. And he has, have you heard of him?
I have, yeah.
Oh, such a brilliant guy. I was listening to, one of his interviews recently, and he was just like dropping all kinds of amazing, I don't even remember exactly what I was going to tell you right now, but it'll come back. Anyway, he's a fascinating guy. And we were just talking about what? New energy and
2020, even
2020,
numbers.
and yeah. Dang it! It was
Approaching
so
things.
good. I got really excited about him because he's such a
Rewind the tape
brilliant guy.
and play it back and see what
Yeah,
you said.
what was my thought process? What was Ann thinking about like 30 seconds ago? Something really, really smart that he said. He says a lot of smart things.
So then you sort of, you have your Soul Sundays that you do.
Yeah.
Is that a podcast or it's a live stream and you do it on Twitch and Instagram or Facebook? Or
So Soul Sunday is kind of something that evolved for me over the last 2 years, and it's a talk show right now. And it's all about emotional intelligence, and sort of drawing from my personal experience as an actor and a perpetual student of life. And sort of combining, my journalism background and sort of skill to address what I found were common questions about life and sort of use some of the life lessons that I've learned, over the years in a productive way. And it started on Instagram Live only because that's kind of like the hub for my fan base. And I used to get all these lovely questions, and I still do, like people like to ask, what was it like making out with so-and-so? And what's it like acting? Or what's it like doing that? Or, and it's great. Those are awesome questions. And I always try to just be as honest and as authentic with anyone that ever asks me anything. Because what else do we have to offer each other, right? Just honesty in ourselves and openness. And then I realized, there's an actual need for that, I think, in our society, and especially with the younger generations that are so technologically plugged in. There were all these other questions that were coming up that were about depression and anxiety, because I'm a pretty, I like to think of myself, and the way that I live my life is proactively and mindset based. Like you have to be your own best friend, and you have to sort of balance out all of the different emotions that you're dealing with. I study emotions for a living as an actor. Like if you don't have that foundation, you don't have a character, you don't work. So I thought, okay, why don't I start answering questions honestly based on what I know? And I was doing these lives, and then it kind of evolved from there, where it became topics every week. And then there was, how on Instagram, for example, the videos only live for 24 hours. And then I used to get, where can I see this again? And I was like, well, then my friend came up with Twitch, which is a gaming platform, actually. I had no idea, but it literally is kind of like its own built-in broadcast system, right? And you could broadcast anywhere, anytime, and it lives on the Twitch platform for about 2 months. and then you can do anything to it. You can edit it in-house and put it on YouTube and do whatever. And then the podcast version of the conversations evolved from there because, you know, even after that, some people are not familiar with Twitch, and so there was a request, which I found, you know, at first a bit challenging because I didn't know anything about podcasting. I was like, oh, where do I put this? I don't know. You know, like I was like iTunes. And anyway, long story short, it ended up working out really great, and now you can find it pretty much anywhere, you know. There's a great for
And it is conversational. It's two-way. You're taking questions from the people and talking live and addressing issues, challenges, stories. You know, it is very inclusive. It's not just you sitting telling people what you think. It's about you.
It's about the conversation. It's about openness. And at first, I actually didn't even know if anyone would be open and honest. You know, as an actor, like I've always been very in touch with my emotions, and my life is an open book. Like what you see is what you get. I actually enjoy very much. My friend, one of my really close friends, laughs at me all the time because she's like, "You just go deep. Like you just don't have enough. I don't have a middle ground. You know, like I'll come in and I'll have a conversation and we will talk about life. You know, like I'm not good at the small talk in general, but you know, you gotta like have fun with it too. But it's like meaningful conversations about emotional intelligence is what we focus on. Meaningful conversations. So we do address all the gamut of emotions, you know, from depression to anxiety to fear, how you deal with fear, you know, anger, betrayal, joy. Let's not just go to the negative ones, right? Because oftentimes people find it comical to talk about, hey, what are your dreams? Like, let's talk about your, you know, and how do you actively achieve those? What is the anatomy of a belief? How does a belief get created? When you talk about, you know, pathways of thinking and, you know, what are emotions even? Where do they even come from? They come from our patterns of thinking, our patterns of thought, which then become emotions, which then become the actions emotions compel us to do things one way or another. And that's what most of the other world sees, right? They see our actions. They don't understand our internal world. Most of the world out there, although this is shifting and changing, especially now that we're in a new decade, you know, has no idea about understanding emotion or even what to do with them. You know what I mean? Like, and that it unifies us as humans.
I wonder why that is. Why people are so resistant to sort of digging into that. Like I find for myself, I find I read a lot on Taoism years ago, and it sort of reshifted my way of seeing things. It's nothing's good, nothing's bad. It just is. It's sort of the foundation of it.
100%.
And so the idea that sadness is a bad emotion to me doesn't make sense. It's just another emotion, and I find pleasure sometimes in feeling those what are classically considered negative emotions like sadness and fear and anger, and it's like, well, it's not, without those you wouldn't truly be able to feel joy.
100%.
So I find people who sort of like restrict their allowing themselves to feel those quote quote negative emotions are actually limiting their ability to enjoy the positive emotions as well.
Because it's all connected, you know? And I truly think it comes down to perspective from what I gather. And I also love talking to people about this because it helps me to learn more about, you know, the foundation of it all and why we do it. But in terms of why most people are afraid, I mean, if you are not a self-aware individual, so if you don't spend 24 hours a day like I do, thinking about who I am, what I like, how I interact with people, why I interact with people, you know, if you're not sensitive and intuitive sometimes and feel other people's energy, right? If you're not aware in those ways, and you're just kind of rolling through life, right? It becomes overwhelming when you do start feeling things and you don't know what to make of it, right? So then the question is like, what do I do with this energy? Emotion is energy in motion, period. Good, bad, whatever. It really isn't something to be afraid of or worried about because you're alive. If you didn't feel anything, any movement in you is good movement, right? Anger, like you said, is one of the best emotions sometimes to feel because if you're down and depressed and defeated, you need the energy of anger to like pump you up and move you up to another emotion, another level of, you know, being, like you were saying. But emotions just help us process this energy, right? Based on what? Based on our thoughts, our perspective on life. And it's interesting that you would enjoy negative emotions, right? Because in my understanding of how everything works, right? Like, think of it as a pendulum. Like you said, without the valleys, you wouldn't be able to appreciate the peaks, right?
Yeah.
And you don't know the difference. It's like if we were just like this, you would just be flat in the way that you operate it, but we're not. We are so complex, and the reason we're complex is because we're geared to survive and to constantly grow. There's no regression, there's only progression. And unfortunately, if we don't keep up with that progression, right, like our emotional world becomes this like mysterious thing that holds us back, unfortunately, and can actually cause a lot of problems, right, and misunderstandings in how we deal with each other. Sometimes a lot of not understood frustration, or like, you know, anger, even, like if you don't know how to process that, it comes out in the weirdest ways in people's behaviors, right? Like, do you ever meet someone and you're sitting there and you're like, something's off. They look normal. They're standing there. They're perfectly fine on the outside.
Right.
And then but there's something, right? Like, we are first and foremost sensory beings, right? Even though you and I are sitting on these like chairs, there is so much more to this energy that we are exchanging right now. And energy to me is the true currency of like impact, of connection, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't, I find the value of understanding the energy that is flowing within you and the process of it very valuable, personally. And I think it's part of my life purpose to, as a communicator, as an artist, you know, just sort of bring light to it. And I truly mean light to it, because when you think about negative emotions, for example, I like to think of it as light and the absence of light. It causes negative emotions. Light is you, effervescent, joyous, fun, functioning up here, being your full human self. When you're angry, when you're sad, when you're envious, when you feel betrayed, this is literally, you feel. It's your perception of what's happening blocking the light. That's sort of how I think of it.
You ever thought about writing a book? You should get all this stuff down so people can like consume it
So,
in depth.
interestingly enough, and I do a lot of like, I actually have a lot of things that I like to listen to all the time and get inspired by and think about it. I'm turning my Soul Sundays into a Soul Sunday school, actually. They will be probably, 5 to 10 minute bite-sized courses, because obviously geared towards youth primarily. I honestly think that part of my life's work also is, and the reason why a lot of my fan bases are just very young. So again, it was accidental that my focus went towards, youth right off the bat. But I have always been connected to this notion that if you plant the right seeds from the very beginning, and you have understanding, there's no need for violence and anger and outbursts and, the stuff that comes from the lack of clarity, right? And so, I'm kind of working on developing some bite-sized, tangible courses, possibly starting on a platform called Skillshare, which, I find really fascinating. I have to get accustomed to and learn a bit more about, but there's a few friends that have suggested Skillshare, and then also just kind of making it available, right, on your own terms from that point on, YouTube and all this other stuff. But Soul Sunday School is kind of exciting for me because, and again, it would be a progression from these conversations. Like, the body of my knowledge right now, I feel very fortunate because it truly is a collaborative result, in a sense, The talk show is very interactive. There are kids from all over the world, and actually adults from anyone can participate, right? But like, I've had educators reach out to me. I've had members of like different religious groups reach out to me and suggest topics, or like, I really liked how you addressed this, or because it's quite general and philosophical in nature, but also real and tangible, right? It's something that it appeals to like our human nature, not the divisive pockets that we sort of classify ourselves in, right? As society would dictate. But I think it would be fun. That's the next step. That'll be something that I want to do later this year. I sort of have some fun ideas. That was a lot. Yeah, you know what? And you popped in on some of them. That's so nice.
Yeah, I
Thank you for
I
that,
popped
by
in
the way.
yesterday for a bit. I didn't I had to get some stuff done. I
No,
wasn't there
of
the whole
course.
time, but yeah, no, it's great to see. It's really engaging, and yeah, it's just like this sort of like wealth of just great advice and super positive, you know, support, and yeah, it's really great to see.
Thank you.
And
It's been nice, and they've created like a bit of a community. What's been the most wonderful thing is just to see people take the information and make it their own. You know, because I think that that's the most valuable exchange that you can ever have, and you know, the essence of connection is when you put something out there and hope for the best, and then when people are actually interested and they're like, I had one of my favorite, most lovely girls in Germany. She was 19, and she shared one of the podcasts, one of the first podcasts, in class in Germany. And her teacher, at the end of it, and they discussed it in class, I think, said that she would like to make it part of the curriculum.
Wow.
Starting next year.
Amazing.
So, I literally had like tears in my eyes, and I was sitting there and I was like, this is unbelievable. Number one, like, thank you for sharing that, you know, but to see that people are, you know, engaging with it and also can find value in it long term, which was the goal from the very beginning, you know. I was hoping to sort of be able to kind of take it on the road as well in the future and, you know, do like, actually go into schools, because I think it would be a very valuable thing to added in a things I wish they taught in school.
Right. Yeah, and that's funny that there really is no sort of emotionally based curriculum. That it's just, and that, I mean, going back to it potentially is why we feel so vulnerable speaking about how we feel, and it's almost seen as a weakness, like as a man too. Where if you make yourself vulnerable through emotion, then it's like it's not a celebrated quality, let's say, you know.
Well, you know where that's from, right? That's 100% our survival instinct. Like back in the cave days, it's my favorite analogy, right? Like, I mean, it was do or die, right? If you were like this emotive, if you showed any emotion, like you were making yourself obvious, and pop, you were like, that person's dangerous, like, or that person's visible, or that person is, you know, sticking out in some weird way. Emotion makes you what? Unique.
Yeah.
Isn't it great? Like, emotion makes you stick out. We all have access to it. But we walk around in life, you know, kind of like, no, it's all good. You know, I don't feel things. I'm good. I'm perfect. Look at me. Yeah. I don't feel anything. I'm just perfectly out here. And it's like, I find it wonderfully comical when you see some people that are just clearly wound up. Like, they are so wound up.
You just need a good cry or take it out on a speed bag or like, just let it out.
And you know what the thing is, like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what's amazing about not crying is that the emotion has to come out somewhere. Like I said, energy and motion, right? So what do? As a male, let's say, in today's society, right, where there are a lot of misconceptions, it's changing too, but like you said, you know, you grow up with a certain what is right to do and what is not, and how emotive can you be and what is not, and whatever, and things get passed down differently wherever you are. But what do when you have all this excess emotion? Turn to what? Substance abuse. Or not even abuse, other ways. You look for outlets, right, which sometimes can lead to substance abuse, which can lead to mental illness and disorders. And it would actually be so much better if we just told, you know, our young kids growing up, like, hey, man, you're going to want to cry sometimes. Yeah. And that's perfectly normal. Like, in fact, you should, because if you cry it out, it's done. You don't have to worry about it. You know what I mean? And it's perfectly normal and natural and human, and everyone does it, or everyone could do it.
I wonder if everyone does do it. Like, there's people that will, you know, swear up and down. It's like, I don't cry. But it's like, no, really? Like, not even behind closed doors when, you know, there's...
Like I said, I look at my dad, too, right? And I can honestly tell you, probably in my life, I've seen my father cry, like, maybe 3 times. And those were significant, tough moments in life. You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, and I've heard that story many times. You know, interesting that you talk about, like, the male energy, right, is meant to be what? Strong and, like...
There's that bravado, for whatever reason, that you have to man up, like, is a term, right? Like, and it's like, why do we have such a ridiculous resistance to sort of embracing and celebrating one of the best parts of being human, which is emotions, right? Like, why are we trying to shut that down? Why, you know, there's have you heard of Mark Bowden? He's a body
Mhm.
language expert. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So he's a friend of mine, and we're going to do an episode at some point too. But he's every time I hang out with him, it feels really awkward because he's very emotive and very expressive, and his whole thing is body language. So, but he analyzes body language to such a micrometric level that I'm like, oh, where do I?
Are you looking at me right now?
Oh,
That's so funny.
I'm just gonna do a peek here. Oh,
Yeah.
I thought I heard the fan go off. We're good. Yeah. So it's he's he's sort of spoken, but just to go back to sort of what you were saying about the caveman sort of thing, like a lot of what he talks about is that sort of the primal foundation of our body language, of our instincts, and when you're doing things like this or
You know what's fascinating? The primal instincts are passed down. Like,
it's still there.
a baby is not born with, I mean, we have a survival instinct, but everything is taught. Behavior is taught when you think about it, right? So the fact that we learn about history is why history repeats itself.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I think
And it's
history
like-
also repeats itself though, because everybody's living their first version of life. So they make the mistakes that the previous generation makes, and until you make that mistake, you don't learn that lesson. So I think that maybe more like ingrained, I don't know, nature versus nurture, right?
Yeah, and you're all part of society. And the thing is, right, like when you first pop in, right, and there's a newborn, like, woohoo, like, here's the world, right? Like, there's nothing, you're a sponge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this amazing philosopher that was talking about, his name is Osho, and I read a lot of like different things, and he was talking about how there's two phases of life. In the first half of your life, you build a body armor around you as a human being based on the things that you absorb from your surroundings. It's literally, you don't know what to do as a young person, right? And you're getting stuff from your parents, you're getting stuff from school, you're getting stuff from society, you're getting stuff from everywhere and building this beautiful armor. And yet, the essence of who you are is always in there. As the baby, the baby's like pure, right? Like untouched. Like the world can be whatever I make it, and all of a sudden you're absorbing all these things coming at you, right? So all these lessons, all this history comes at you from all over, and then it's in the second phase of life, Osho says, it's your responsibility. And in fact, it's just, you won't be able to not break out of the armor that has been built to protect you so that you can survive in this society, and then become, like your own person and get to choose the purpose of why you're here and what you wish to pass on,
Do you think everybody goes through that sort of profound
I really do.
revelation?
I think that
Or does
everyone,
just some people, just kind of numb out. They build up the armor and they never break free because they're too afraid to experience an authentic version of themselves.
I think that everyone has the potential to break out. And then it becomes your choice and your own journey of realization when you start living the way you want to live. And I think for me, it was like such a profound understanding that you have a choice at every corner. It's never too late. It's never too early. That's why when I work with youth of any kind, there's some people that are 10, 12, like I always say, just know that you're choosing. Whatever you're doing right now, it's your choice.
Yeah.
You're in control. At any moment in time, you can do something different. You're never bound to your mistakes or your bad decisions or the steps that have led you to realize now what the next step should be, Even when you're feeling so crappy that you realize, that there's some people in your life that you can't trust or that are toxic or that you want to take a new direction. I hate this. When you say I hate this, you automatically know what you love.
Right.
If you turn around, and then
It's like
see it that way.
Socrates, right? The Socratic method, where you take away what isn't true to find the truth.
Absolutely.
So,
and then it becomes your choice. And then you know the two, and then you go, okay, which one am I going to wallow in this one that taught me the lesson, or am I going to turn towards the new? And it's not an easy. I'm not saying it's like be smart enough to turn towards the new. Like there's something wrong with you if you don't. If you can't break out of that, everything's about momentum, right? So that's why we need both sides of the emotional spectrum to help push us through those periods of growth. And the only kind of significant growth is when you make a decision about something new and actually follow it through, Because I also think that you can have a realization. You can have 500 realizations. if you don't act on them, all you're doing is like you have another idea and another idea. You know? And the sad part about what happens is that the negative emotions build up when you don't allow yourself to follow that other good idea, the first good idea that you had, you know? When you just sort of like get bogged down by like fear or uncertainty, because we're all afraid of the unknown, especially. But the juice of life should be, you know, I get an idea, I follow through. And I move to the next level. You know, I level up, like in video games. I level up, I level up, I level up.
And it's amazing that you sort of actively pursue that personal growth and then share what you learn outwardly as well. I think a lot of people don't do that in life, not just sort of emotionally, whatever. I think they just hit a certain point and they're like, okay, I'm a grown up now. This is who I am. This is how things are. And then they don't keep working at it. They don't keep, you know, expanding, learning, growing. I had a friend when he was finished university. He's like, I'm done learning. I'm like, well, that's sad for, you know, the next 65 years if you don't feel like there's anything left that you need to learn or grow. You know, I find that as strange because I'm personally like I'm fascinated by everything. So I'm always like, what can I, you know, no.
Yeah.
What can I learn? How can I better understand this existence that we're in? And I just went to a Buddhist monastery in the summer and lived for a few weeks, and ended up going back with my. I sweet talked the abbot of the monastery to let me come back because they're nanotechnology.
Yeah.
So it's a Thai forest tradition monastery.
You brought our friend.
So they live in the woods, and so the first time I went there, I was like, I need to bottle this up and bring it back and share it with people.
Love it.
So I produced a virtual reality meditation series that I'm still working on editing. But in essence, people are like, well, that's basically I just went into the woods because they have this beautiful 200-acre monastery in the woods. It's about an hour and a half outside of Ottawa. Rolling hills, just beautiful. This my favorite spot. Maybe I'll cut a little piece of it into this as well.
That'd be great.
Was by this beaver pond. So when I first got there, I sort of dropped my bags and wandered into the woods and got lost because I'm like, I'm at a forest tradition monastery. I should be in the forest. That sort of should be my sort of introduction. And I knew very little about Buddhism prior to going. It was just sort of like a random like, wonder what that's about. And so contacted the monastery and set it up. But so I wandered into the woods, and you know, I live in Toronto. We live in Toronto. There's sort of like a cacophony of big city sounds constantly in that. And until I got into the woods, and I grew up in a small town when I was younger. But getting back to that sort of like the stillness and the quietness of nature, it was almost loud. You know what I mean? How quiet it was. It was
yeah.
like,
So what was your biggest takeaway? I'm just curious in that environment, I guess, in that atmosphere.
So I wandered up to this thing, and it was a beaver pond. So these beavers had dammed up a thing and sort of created this little pond, and so the beavers were splashing around, and it was just the sound of the crickets just sort of became loud because even though like you would normally never even be able to hear that, but it was like, and the wind and so I just closed my eyes. I'm extremely hyperactive brain. So I have a hard time sort of gearing down. So it was like torture for the first 15 minutes of just trying to be there and absorb the moment.
Sure, I can imagine, yeah.
And,
and it's torture for everyone, to be honest. Like, when you think about it, you don't even realize how fast your thoughts are rolling until you're in a situation.
Where you then have the opportunity to sort of shut that down and take a listen to what's going on, you know, inside it and take a moment. And so I heard this rustling and opened my eyes and I was surrounded by deer. Like, it was just the most incredible experience. And sun was going down. So it was just, so I was like, I need to capture this, and I need to go back. And I just, I was editing it the other day, and I popped in the headset for a bit and just sort of like sat there, soaked it in, and did a meditation. It was just, it's amazing how powerful immersive technology can be if you use it right. And,
yeah.
So anyways.
And nature, but it's so powerful what you just said too, because like the slowdown, you made me think about Eckhart Tolle and his Power of Now. Have you read The Power of Now?
I haven't.
Any chance? You get a chance.
I will.
I actually haven't read the last 2 chapters either, but like you just get into it and you get it. You get the essence of what he's talking about. But the idea of your mind running you instead of you running your mind. Our minds are machines. This is a vessel in so many words. This is just a ship that we all just sail throughout life, right? Like, this is just what mine looks like. That's what yours looks like, and you can do whatever you want. You can customize it, stylize it, whatever. But the point is, our minds are machines just like everything else. And if we don't know how to shut them off, they will
burn out.
Just keep going and keep going and keep going. And the reason you want to shut it off or just quiet it for a bit and do a meditation of any kind. The best kinds of meditations are just those where you're just thinking of nothing. Like, you don't have to have an intention or obsessively think about, love, joy, peace. Like, so there's so many intense things that you can do with meditation, but I like the ones that are just literally like nothing. Just 15, 20 minutes of do what? Transcend the physical is what you're trying to do and connect to your higher self, right? And you do that through stillness, through peace. And it's amazing, having technology like that can facilitate that, because for someone that's not used to even the concept that your brain can shut off, that you can just not think, right? So many of us take pride in the quickness of our thought, in the skill of our intelligence. I was telling you about my Romanian culture, that's actually something that I connect with very strongly, that's like, it's important to be intelligent and to do a lot of things in life, to do. And you're like, yeah, but have you ever thought about not just doing, but specializing into things that are connected to your purpose, breaking out of the chains of what society or anything or all those impressions that you got that you should be doing? Because I think that that's one of our biggest battles in life sometimes, right? Finding your own identity or finding our purpose or our passion. It's like, there's so much, especially nowadays, that we're exposed to. And it's like, so much is possible, and then so many young kids are getting depressed and anxious at 12. I didn't even know what depression or anxiety was when I was 12, but they are, because they're overwhelmed, because they're thinking oh my god, look at all this stuff I can do. What do I do?
Constantly bombarded with media too. It's like we consume media like never before.
Absolutely.
Like, people are constantly looking at a screen of some sort, and it's like I've intentionally started turning my phone off and going for a walk.
This is so good of you. Like I said, you're so much better than me, because I still struggle with this.
No, but I need to do that. Otherwise, I'm constantly just filling
Stimulate.
myself. Yeah. And so for me, meditating with the monks in the woods was just a profound sort of awakening for me to go oh yeah, it's important to shut down, to reboot, and finding that stillness and that quietness. By that, at the end of the first time I was at the monastery, I could meditate 3 or 4 hours. The first day, 15 minutes, and I was crawling out of my skin. In the meditation, they do morning and evening meditations. They do chanting and meditations, and the evening one's an hour long, and I couldn't. I was just I can't sit still that long.
And isn't it funny how your body, so our thoughts fuel emotions, trigger the energy in motion, because that's what emotions are, and then we are meant to do stuff with this body, right? And so how funny is it to see your body do funky things, in response to your need to calm your system?
And I think just the constant, the barrage of stimulation that the world provides to us these days, when there's an absence of that, you're it's literally like a drug withdrawal or something, right? Someone who's clearing out the heroin or something. You're just something's missing. I need why am I not stimulated? Where's the adrenaline? Where's the
Isn't it fascinating? And it there's a difference. I love to listen to a lot of Abraham Hicks stuff, and it's very much wellness based and philosophy based, and this idea that you need to clear out and connect to something that's that's your I can't even say it properly, but there's a difference between acting and doing something and inspired acting and doing something.
Right.
It's not being busy. It's being busy versus I'm clearing out all of this junk, I'm connected, and now I'm busy, right? Now I'm inspired to do things from a place of calm and peace, and my actual life's purpose as opposed to just doing things for the sake of doing them because I can. You know, and for me, it's so funny that I started this by telling you about acting and how my evolution of understanding acting has been. And at the very beginning of my journey, it was like, yeah, sure, I can do anything, absolutely, no problem. You know, what do you want me to do? And then you're like, no. You refine your skill, you learn, you know, what the art form is all about, and then you go, what can I actually bring to this? And it's so fascinating. And then I'm looking forward to whatever the next level of it is, you know, but it's exactly the same thinking. And that's why I think it's so powerful to know, number one, that, you know, what meditation is, that you should do it, you know, because
everybody needs to, like,
everybody
should. Yeah,
just because it's good for you to just connect to something that's solid, to something that's pure and not just around, not just stuff that's around, you know, just like literally center and connect to what really matters to you, and then work from there and work from there, you know. But even I struggle with that often. Sometimes life is just coming at you, you know, and you're like, oh god.
And those, I mean, the times when we have the least to take a moment and take a breath is the times we need it the most, right? And that's always, for me, that's been a challenge.
Absolutely. And this is why one of my favorite things to say is practice makes progress.
Right.
Habits.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's not just knowing good things to do. It's being practiced and making them and building them as like pillars of your lifestyle that makes a difference.
I think another thing that I sort of picked up was appreciating the moments, as opposed to just existing in them. And I always have a problem with that. I have a challenge. But even when I was at the monastery, eating became a really sort of focused central point where I would use it as a meditative practice to eat very consciously, like every chew, every bite, absorbing the energy, being appreciative of flavors, the textures, the energy that you're absorbing in it. That food is literally becoming you. It's your cells.
That's so cool. I love that.
And it was when it sort of hit me. I was just sitting in front of the monastery, just open tears. Like, it was just like an overwhelming experience for me to be able to connect to something just as simple as like eating a bowl of rice and go like, oh wow, this is profound. You know, this is me. This is becoming me. This is, you know, and then sort of. Yeah, it was so I do that now. It's sort of like as a follow-up practice. I spend a lot of time focusing, intentionally eating. Like when I eat, I very much.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And
you could apply that same mentality to, you know, enjoying every conversation, or enjoying every walk, or enjoying every lunch break, or you know, which is interesting. Another Abraham Hicks thing that I was listening to, where they were talking about, you know, when you're focused on everything, you're focused on nothing. Everything comes back to focus, right? So everything we ever do, everything we find meaningful, right? It's about repetition, enjoying something, repeating it, refining that process, and then transcending it to something new, right? And what I find fascinating in today's day and age is we're just so overexposed to so many things because we have so many options out there that there is a lack of focus. You know, ADD, for example, right? Yeah. Again, we have to make a term for it. We have to make a term for lack of focus because, you know, everything is like labeled as some kind of disorder nowadays. Not that I'm, you know, looking down at it or anything or criticizing, but it's like we don't really know how to focus anymore. And it's something that you practice. And I think that, again, you think that you're not good at something long enough and you convince yourself. A belief is just a thought that you keep thinking. So that's why you think you're not good at certain things, but actually you're just not focused. You're not just calibrated to something enough. And you haven't explored it enough in detail, like you were just saying, right? Where you're literally sitting there and appreciating, and it's appreciating the detail, not feeling, you know, defeated or overwhelmed by the detail of something, right? If you feel that, that's just not the thing for you. Like, right? If you're like looking at a meal and you're like, ugh, and you feel overwhelmed by all the details of it, just don't have it, you know, or don't eat it at that time or whatever. But like, when you appreciate something, that's when you're practicing the right type of forward motion, I guess, in anything. And I find that for myself right now, you know, like the refinement of anything, the measure of who you are, your character, your achievements, everything comes back to focus. It's not even just about ability. And that's why it fascinates me how so many people, we're so quick to be down on ourselves, you know, talk about emotional intelligence. Like we think we're not good enough. We think we're being judged. Those are automatic go-tos, but it's not, it's for lack of trying in the proper way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I like to tell people, you know, it's like, yeah, if you try something and you have a defeatist attitude about it, chances are you're not going to be good at it.
You've already
Not
lost
gonna make
before you started. Yeah.
Not going to make any progress significantly.
I think a lot of times for me, the challenge with growth and change is that there's just the repetition. It's the habit, and
that gets old. You're bored with it?
No, it's just my life is. I mean, everybody's lives is you brush your teeth, you do this, you do that. You know, there's a series of sort of daily habits, and there's a routine that happens, and if one of those habits is toxic,
sure,
it's built into your entire routine. Like your whole system of habits sort of feed each other. So in order to break that one, it's not just about stop doing that one thing, or you know, maybe focus on this, meditate more, or whatever it might be that you're trying to improve. It's built into your entire structure of your life. So it comes down to sort of like shaking the foundation of your whole structure of habits, right? And that for me is the challenge. It's not even if it's just one small thing that I'm trying to improve or trying to grow towards. It's not just that one thing. It's the entire system around that thing that needs to be realigned, right?
Absolutely.
So
you think of like a snake, the way a snake sheds its skin sometimes, you know, like that's a very interesting point. And I think that the way to sort of be your best friend in that mentality, and I always think about positive pathways of thinking about things, you know, not just like any thinking. There's what you want to achieve and the habits for it, right? So there's got to be flexibility. Your greatest asset as a human being is resilience. It's striving towards growth even through habit and history and, you know, everything you've ever been through. And the way I like to think about it is like whatever I was before is a moment in time. Anything you are is a moment in time. The only constant is change. So it's not even about like, in order for me to grow, I have to break all these things. No, you're already growing. Like,
yeah,
that's a given,
the default state, yeah,
right?
Yeah,
you're already going in that direction. And if you want to change a habit, you have to start with that habit, assuming that, you know, everything else will follow and fall into place. Not that everything else will lock you down to the way that you were. Do you know what I mean? So I like to think, hey, I'm growing. I made a decision to do something different. I understand that everything else I've ever done is always going to be connected. I'm always going to be able to go back and stay connected to whatever I was. But it's my choice to want to move forward, to want to eliminate whatever I don't want in my life and move forward. And therefore, it's like putting one foot in front of the other and making it as easy as possible for you. And reminding yourself this notion that resilience and flexibility is our greatest asset. And it's within you. It's within every one of us. It's the nature of being human.
It's one, I remember this one time, 20 some odd years ago when I was directing a lot of music videos at the time. I was really frustrated. I was really angry. I'm a perfectionist, so I'm constantly like dissatisfied with the work that I was doing. And I was
a true artist right here. That's
exactly
it. A lot of us have.
It was just, but I was sort of like constantly and constantly frustrated with things. And I randomly bumped into a friend. I was a cheerleader when I was young.
Amazing. I didn't even know this. How did I not know this?
Trent University. didn't go to Trent University. I was a high school kid, and I moved out when I was 17, so I was living with some university kids, and the cheerleading coach was my roommate. And so she was like, we didn't get enough guys to come out and like face the stunts and stuff.
Come at me.
Would you come out? And I was like, ugh. And it was Peterborough, small town, kind of like, a lot of my friends were kind of like jockey and, you know, and they're like, cheerleader.
Cheer squad.
And then I went out, but I went out and I'm like high school kid hanging out with a bunch of really beautiful university girls. And then,
yeah, bet they weren't laughing
and then,
huh?
Then my friends
Making a pyramid.
did an about face fairly quickly. Anyway, so that's a long sort of convoluted story. So one of my stunting partners from cheerleading was in Toronto and sort of bumped into her randomly, and it's like, oh hey, you want to come check out my studio? And so I was kind of like bitching and moaning a little bit, and she was like, sort of looking around. We had won a bunch of awards at that time. We had frames from all the videos that we had framed on the wall. We had some like special effects guys who were doing some stuff at the time, and she's like, "How can you be like frustrated? How can you be anything but like elated right now?" And she's like, "Do you remember we had that conversation years ago? This was before I went to film school." She's like, "You said that you would do anything just to get on a music video set because that you love film and you love music, and so the combination of those two things is like a dream to you." She's like, "Do you remember that conversation?" She's like, "Look at yourself now through the eyes of that kid. Like, take a step back 5 years and look at yourself through those eyes." And then once I started doing that, I was like, "Oh yeah, it's hard because growth is slow and growth is sort of like, you know, incremental to the point."
I think that you catching up with your growth. I think the realizations are sometimes incremental and slow.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's challenging to notice. It's like watching hair grow. Like it does. You notice it's like, oh, how did it get so long, right? But I think so. So for myself, and that conversation with her was profound in that I had never thought of that, and it's something that I'll do now to this day. It's a practice of looking at myself through sort of yesterday's eyes and go like, oh yeah, I am doing okay.
Right.
You know, because when you're caught up in the moment, it feels frustrating. It feels like you're sort of like pushing a boulder up a mountain. But when you step back and you realize, you know, how far you've come and how amazing things are. Like just to
that's
to
also in
appreciate.
the spirit of appreciation. I was literally about to say that. I'm like, you're doing the look back in the spirit of appreciation, which is a productive process.
Yeah.
Some people do the look back in a negative way, in the sense that, you know, when I was in grade 9, that was my peak year. And I was, you know, I peaked, man. That was it. I was part of everything. I was the smartest kid in class. I was dating the whatever, you know, the most beautiful girl. Like, man, those were the days, right? And you're just
grade
like...
9 was a nightmare for me.
I was literally just joking. Like, you know, but you know, like I have a lot of people that like, a lot of conversations, a lot of deep conversations, where people just like, you know, you look back and then you're kind of working against yourself in that instance. But when you do it with appreciation, like you said, in terms of how far I've come, or like what I like to do sometimes is think back to like the moments that I've ever had on set or working on a project that were truly satisfying. Sometimes when you do the work, right? The thing that's amazing about what we do in this business is that there is no real roadmap. In a sense, what's scary about it too is that there are no rules. But that's why acting, or, you know, the entertainment business is the art form of life, truly the art form of life, because you are constantly creating and reflecting and growing and, you know, shaping and molding and doing things. Whereas like sometimes when you have a very established structure in other lines of work, right? It's easy to get caught up in the habit, in the system, and you know, and it doesn't feel as intense figuring it out or walking into the unknown, but it also doesn't feel as satisfying when you achieve certain things. Like there are certain moments, you know, in my career that I look back on and I'm like, that was superhuman. You know, like I don't know what the heck that was. Like, you know, and sometimes like even performances, like I don't necessarily like to watch everything, but like there's certain things where you're like, huh, like that's not me.
Do you watch your films?
You know? Yeah.
And it shows you.
Yeah, and I like to learn from it.
Some actors despise it. They can't stand seeing themselves on camera. It makes them uncomfortable. But
no, I have no ego.
Yeah.
Like honestly, I think that if you sometimes spend energy thinking about, you know, I like to think about the process. So for me, I like to look at does that seem real? Is that authentic? Did I feel, when you end a take and you don't remember what the heck you did, that means you were focused and in it, right? Anything that you do, when you're actually focused on something and you're molding it, doing it, creating it, you're not physically thinking about what you look like or what face you made or whatever, those are the moments and you feel it. You come off of a take or and you're like, I don't know what the heck that was, and that's awesome. That's when that to me is the most satisfying feeling,
I've heard stories of actors completely getting so into it that they blank. They forget that they're like, it's the end of the day and they're like, are we going to start shooting? They're like, no, we just shot for that state of flow or that state of just being completely inside of it.
Inside of it. What a beautiful thing to do. And when you are completely inside of it, it's really weird or hard to even look beyond, right? So only in retrospect do we, step back and go, oh yeah, that was cool. I can have a memory of something and my memory of it won't even be that's what I love about the visual medium, won't even compare sometimes. And I find it hilarious when my mom is very into it and loves to give a lot of unsolicited advice. And most of it is very superficial, right? Like, say that line a little better next time or whatever. And then the truth of it, when you know the mechanics of it, right? I don't ever think about how I say a line. It's about being in the moment and the intention behind it and or at least you shouldn't think about that. But it's just wonderful, the difference between being a part of the process and actually giving of yourself within it and watching it as an outsider.
Are you a method actor? Do you replicate the lives and the stories of the people that you portray?
Yeah. I don't like to think of it. I have tools from so many different practices of acting, and so many different experiences. I've studied pretty much anything under the sun. And I think that's the coolest thing. But I always say to either my students or anyone starting out, it's truly whatever works for you. It's who you are. It's understanding yourself as a human being, what works for you, what doesn't, what affects you, what doesn't. How do your emotions flow? Once you get a handle on that, it's about what you find useful to get yourself there, I guess, as an actor, right? Some people need to be method. I look at the work that Daniel Day-Lewis does sometimes, and I'm mesmerized. I don't even know how he manages to even the pitch of his voice changes. Meryl Streep. Oh man, there are some people that are masters that work in certain ways. I only thought of Daniel Day-Lewis because I know he's very method, right? But I don't particularly think that Meryl is always method. She's got her own. I've heard various things about what she does, but it's very much for her. It's about connecting to the character, from what I understand. So. She just becomes it. It literally, you just become it without questioning, doubting that you can or not or whatever. Get to a certain place where you're just like, the script, cool. Oh, I'm drawn to it. I am it.
What do you do then to not be overwhelmed with because most narrative film and television is sort of a heightened or a hypersensitive reality. It's it's sensational stories that are sort of, which is what makes them interesting. It's something that you don't see every day, or these, a lot of times tragic experiences or challenging experiences. How do you barricade yourself from becoming emotionally exhausted from having to deal with those sort of heightened emotions?
I think that it's very situational based, and it's again very much you and how you deal with it. For me, acting is an art form, which means the art form itself is finding the off switch.
Right.
And the balance between how much of myself do I give in this moment, when do I turn it off? And being able to know those switches for yourself, which are very personal switches, what moves me and affects me may not even touch your energy field. Do you know what I mean? You might not even care about the things that will bring me to tears in 5 seconds. Right, but that's not, again, that's part of me as a performer, knowing myself, knowing what is required of the situation, right? Because actors are basically, the art form is being yourself in extraordinary situations, like you just said.
Mm-hmm.
How do I eliminate the stress, the nerves, the, everything else, the noise, give myself fully to what needs to happen here, serve the story, and then is like what the heck it all becomes when it comes all together, right? Because the most beautiful thing too about what we do is that it's such a collaborative effort. It's never just about me. It's never just about, you know, the director or the DOP or the whatever. It's very much a collaborative medium, and I've always loved that most. You know, and there's so much trust that is involved, and there's so many different, you know, cogs in the machine that are all working together. And when it comes together, it's magic. It truly is magic. And if I play my part, you know, to the best of my ability, you kind of influence each other in the best possible way, you know? And it's never just about you.
Mm-hmm. This case, I just rewatched The Shining the other night, so it's fresh in my head. Have you seen, obviously, that?
The original.
Stanley Kubrick basically terrorized that. I can't remember the actress's name. But that was her last role. I think she got PTSD. Like he traumatized her so horribly on set that she wasn't able to step in front of the camera again. He did stuff like he would like make her like sleep deprived. He'd have like just obscure call times, so she was never able to get proper amount of sleep, and just so her performance was so heightened from him basically terrorizing her.
Right.
So people, there's I can't remember, sort of discussion about it recently. Might have been on Joe Rogan podcast or something, but they were talking about, does that justify like that poor woman? But Stanley Kubrick was kind of famous for that. Like in Clockwork Orange, the rape scene there, that woman again had to go to therapy for years. Because it was so visceral, right? So do you think that is that justifiable to sort of emotionally engage to that sort of level of excess to get that authentic performance?
I think that sometimes you need to, again, it's being comfortable being uncomfortable. That's what you need to learn as an actor, you know? There's always something it's always uncomfortable. It's always weird and new, and there's a camera staring at you or whatever, or multiple ones at a time, or other people's energy coming in, right? First thought that popped into my head when you were talking is the fact that I, as a performer, need to know that I have a choice. This is what we were talking about always.
Okay.
It's as far as I want to push it. Mm-hmm. So when you have outside influences, especially when the performer doesn't have the strength of character that they've built over years to know themselves well enough or whatever, to know how far they can push it, to know the balance of that, you know, direction. And that's where you get into trouble. And I don't like that. To be honest with you, but I know how to look out for myself. I know that part of the art form is me going to certain places safely, and then at the end of the night, cut, and then I get to go home. Yeah. Now, when it comes to emotions, and again, like you're putting yourself in a situation, and when you do it authentically, you do it 100%, you're in it, right? Like it does affect you, and it should affect you. But then my practice as a performer is to know that that's a performance, and there's a difference between bringing that home and then you work and for yourself have a process to let that work be here in the studio where it needs to be, and that's it. But when you have outside influences that are abusive, for example, I don't celebrate that necessarily. I don't go, great, good for you. You pushed that actor to the brink of X, Y, Z. And it's like, if that happens and it's unintentional, then you can be like, that was a snapshot in time. That was what needed to be done at that moment. And I, as a performer, was a part of that. Because you always have a choice, right? You can't just be like, it was that director's fault that person got really messed up after. You know what I mean? You can't put blame on that. I have to share my half of the responsibility of my participation in that and going to those places. Now, I've been put in certain weird situations too over my career, right? And I actually remember very adamantly doing an interview once on a radio talk show and being asked about them. And I was like, well, you have to understand that nobody can ever make you do anything, right? When you're young and impressionable, you can be pushed in different directions, right? You don't know how to stand up for yourself. Everything's a constant balance. And I always encourage people to take ownership of their decisions, no matter how far they go. And, you have to take care of yourself. the hardest part about what we do is that it's a very personal effort, right? Like your calling card is your personality in this business, and who you are matters. The essence of who you are is what you're offering up to the table for it to be molded and shaped and like, you know, played with in a sense. And so you have to understand that with a level head. And if you understand that, the earlier you understand that, the better. And then we're also playing. That's very important to understand, right? I was talking about making horror films with a bunch of people the other day, and it's like I just kept going like, how, why do you think this is a good idea to be making such horrific, you know, things? And they were saying, well, there's a difference between reality and fantasy, right? And sometimes it's valuable from a safe distance to see that horrible things can happen and they're out there and whatever, but the key difference is that you're at a safe distance and you know this is performance art. You know this is not real necessarily. It's real, but it's not real.
And it does go back to, again, like to primal urges. There's that bloodlust that's sort of like deep down in the caveman in all of us that's still, you know, lurking around there somewhere, right? That we are fascinated by.
It's interesting to know that it exists. You know, like for me, do I necessarily want to watch? Like, do I go out of my way to watch like extremely horrific things? No, because it's my choice not to, right? But, you know, in certain circumstances, I'm not going to be affected by it tragically, because once you have, you know, a practice fortitude of like strength within your character and you know what's real and not, you know that you can balance, and you know that you always have a choice what to engage in and what to not engage in, right? Then you're good. Then you can balance. Then you can bounce back, you know? And sometimes, I'll be honest, like there's certain parts and certain things that you get to do that affect you. Like they do. They sometimes, like, you know, I remember this is not like a tragic thing in any means, but I worked on a TV series called Remedy once, and I played a therapeutic clown. And I just remember learning so much, watching them in action. You know how hard that job is? Like, I didn't even know it was a job.
Oh, you
know?
You shadowed some real life.
Yes, and I talked to a lot of members of the community, and like, it is a hard job because you're around. Your job is to basically be the emotional, again, balancing point. The bounce up is what they are, right? They try to bring light into a situation where a lot of patients are dealing with terminal diseases. Like they're dealing with a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, a lot of, you know, there's families that are involved. There's also equally the doctors and the staff and, you know, and the nurses and everything that are also psychologically dealing with certain things as they're trying to do a job, right? And so I just remember sitting there being fascinated by the depth of the complexity of the job itself. And, you know, even though it seems all good and fun, you get to wear a red nose sometime and, like, you know, do silly things, there's a lot. There's a lot of stuff that comes with it, you know, that you don't even think about when you don't think about it. So some things you see and some things you do can stay with you. Some days are harder than others. But when you understand that everything's about balance and you can always come back, that's the beauty of performance art. That's why it isn't art, because you're able to come back. You go to places, you come back safely. It's what I love about it most, you know. You can be a doctor one day, a lawyer another, you can be an explorer in the Antarctic if you want for a little bit, you know, and then safely come back home. So hopefully.
Hopefully. Don't get stuck in a character and just never return.
Well, I mean, notorious, like Heath Ledger, right? He did an incredible job on the Joker, but from, you know, the things you hear, again, what is real and what is not comes from the person themselves, not so much in the aftermath. But it did affect him. I think he talked about it, and there were friends of his that talked about it. But, you know, everything's about momentum. So when you allow yourself to be in a dark headspace for very long, you just go deeper and deeper and deeper into darker places. Mm-hmm. So it's understandable why some things, if you don't know how to pull back or pull out, you know, then, you get lost. And it affects you. But is it really an actor because of that? Because it's that commitment. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You need to go to certain, like, you need to be like, I'm doing this, and do it.
So suffer for your art, right?
Yeah, suffering is part of life, too. Everyone is, fascinatingly, I actually had a Soul Sunday conversation once about suffering and pain and how why are we so afraid of pain? We shouldn't be afraid of pain, because pain and suffering are part of the process, this clarifying process of realization and transition between.
The thing with pain is that it's there as a tool for you to know that you need to course correct. It's like not just emotional pain, but physical pain. If you touch something hot, you go like, "Ow, that hurts," right? So you change what's happening. So I think that's the same way physical pain is there to protect us. Emotional pain is the same tool.
Absolutely. I remember I was skiing once and I went all the way up a mountain. I was renting equipment and I had used a size boot that was too big for me, like one size too big, based on my shoe size, whatever. So I get to the top of this mountain. My ankles, both of them, are swimming in these and I was like, oh man, this is how I'm gonna die. This is it. It's done. It's over. Like I went to the black diamond. I was like, oh yeah, going all the way up. I'm so excited. So two options. You just go down, right? I'm skiing, you go down. It's like a 5-minute run, because it was just steep as F, right? It wasn't even like crazy, but it was like, just go. Or just like wait here until some snowmobile or somebody, everyone else had gone down. And I'm just like, oh crap. So I literally went, help me God. And I just went all the way down, pretty much lost half my body weight in sweat by the time I got down. I made it, both ankles intact, petrified, literally petrified that I was going to die. It was one of those moments where I was like, cool. So what I do?
I find it funny that you just accepted that. You're like, oh, well, what else am I going to do? I'm just going to die.
Well, I was hoping. I was hoping for the best, right? But I was like, if both ankles snap, what am I going to do? I'm screwed either way. I'm just stuck at the top of this mountain forever and ever and ever because there's nobody there. Or I'm going to try my chances to get down. And I made it. But the first thing, through that fear, because it was literally like, oh my God, what the heck? I immediately went to the rental shop. I got the right boots, and I went back up the mountain. Because I knew if I didn't, then that's when a moment in time becomes a pattern in life.
Right.
If you lean into that fear, right, then it paralyzes you. Then you're like, oh crap, I'm never going to do this again. I don't ever, 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 ever want to live my life in fear. I really don't. There's so much that you can experience, and there's so much available out there that it's not worth paralyzing yourself. Mm-hmm. Especially knowing how much other fun I'd had skiing in the past, and I was like, I don't want this to become a thing that I'm afraid of, and it was fine, and I did. I made it down. I mean, I straight to the hot tub after. But I was like,
a couple of cocktails.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there was a bunch of that. I was like, if I don't do this now, I'm gonna have a very different idea about skiing. And you just know that, right? You don't want to make up stories in your mind. Our brains make up stories. Mm-hmm. Based on what? Some experiences are better than others. This is how I explain trauma, to people. This is a moment in time that's affected you very, very deeply. That if you ignore, or oftentimes we have to ignore it for a while. We have to put it in a box, and we have to just not think about it until you're ready to even think about it. But if you don't think about it for a long time, it comes out in weird ways. It comes out one way or another, and it can come out in the form of an illness. It can come out in, aggression. It could affect you psychologically, it could affect you physically, but either way, you got to deal with it. And I'll always just encourage everyone to deal with it. This is the best analogy I've ever heard on this. When you're sitting by a fire, right, and there's a spark that flies onto your sweater. If you see it right away, you go, boop, and what do you have? A little black dot, maybe, or nothing, or you just get the spark off. If you don't see it, the spark can burn a hole in your sweater, right? And then you got a holy sweater. So it's the quicker you deal with emotion, the quicker you deal with anything hurtful, painful, traumatic, fearful, whatever, the quicker you learn how to just adjust and process through it. And everyone is different, so everyone's going to make it happen at their own time anyway, right? I truly believe that there's no right time. But I for myself, I process things very quickly. I think that that's sort of my greatest asset as an actor, but also it can be debilitating sometimes. Because if it's bothering me, it's gotta be dealt with. I don't sit on things. But
which is good in relationships and stuff. So many people just sort of bury stuff and then
it pops out in a weird way, right?
Again,
in a very hurtful way.
And not even knowing what the root cause of that was, right? It's why are you the mashed potatoes are cold.
yeah.
What?
Absolutely. You're like, what are you talking about? Why are you so affected by the damn
Yeah.
mashed potatoes? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so funny. Exactly. Yeah, it's very true, Isaac. That's very true.